The air in the courtroom was thick with a silence, so heavy it felt like a physical weight on my chest. It smelled of old wood, stale coffee, and the cloying, cheap floral perfume my sister was wearing. Across the aisle, Zoe sat with a look of beatific serenity on her face, gently rocking the infant in her arms. My infant. My daughter. My baby, whom I had not been allowed to hold in 6 weeks. My husband, Ben, sat beside me, his hand gripping mine so tightly I thought my bones might snap. He was staring straight ahead at the judge, a man with a weary face who held the entire fate of our world in a stack of papers before him. Zoe's lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, had just finished his closing statement, painting my sister as a loving, biological mother being victimized by her wealthy, controlling older sister who was trying to buy her baby. Our lawyer had done his best, presenting contracts and documents, but legal papers felt so cold and flimsy against the powerful, primal image of a mother holding her child. My parents sat directly behind Zoe, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and disapproval. The pity was for her. The disapproval was for me. In their eyes, I was the villain of this story, the one trying to tear a newborn from her mother's arms. They had chosen their side. The judge cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented in the matter of the custody of baby girl Doe, he began, his voice a low monotone that gave nothing away. This was it, the culmination of a year of hope, 9 months of manipulation, and 6 weeks of pure, unadulterated hell. A year ago, my sister had offered me the greatest gift I could ever imagine. Now she was using that gift as a weapon to destroy my life. She hadn't just offered to carry my child, she had planned to steal her from the very beginning. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, so implicitly, that the thought of them betraying you was simply unimaginable? And then they do, in a way that shatters not just your heart, but your entire reality. It's a pain so deep it feels like it rewrites your DNA. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever been blindsided by a betrayal from the person you least expected, please like this video and subscribe to join a community of people who are healing from the unimaginable. To understand how I ended up in that courtroom fighting my own sister for my own child, we have to go back to a place of hope. A place where this nightmare began with a promise that seemed too good to be true. And as I've learned, it usually is. For 5 years, my life had been a series of 2-week waits, of calendars marked with ovulation cycles, of hope and despair in equal, brutal measures. Ben and I had a wonderful life in every other respect. We had a loving marriage, successful careers, a beautiful home, but the one thing we wanted more than anything, a child, was the one thing my body refused to give me. After 3 rounds of IVF and 2 heartbreaking miscarriages, my doctor sat me down and gently told me that carrying a pregnancy to term was, for me, a near impossibility. The grief was a physical thing. It was a hollow ache in my chest that never went away. We started exploring adoption, but the waiting lists were years long, the process invasive and uncertain. It felt like we were at the end of a long, dark road with no light in sight. That's when my younger sister Zoe made her offer. Zoe was my opposite in every way. Where I was a planner, she was spontaneous. Where I was a saver, she was a spender. She was a free spirit, which was my parents' euphemism for chronically unemployed and perpetually in debt. She was 27, working as a part-time yoga instructor, and always seemed to be in the middle of some self-created drama. I loved her, but I also spent a good portion of my life bailing her out, lending her money, and offering a shoulder to cry on after her latest disastrous relationship. I was the responsible older sister, and she was the charming, chaotic younger one. She came over for dinner one night and saw the stacks of adoption paperwork on our coffee table. I saw the look of pity in her eyes and braced myself for some unhelpful New Age advice about manifesting a baby. Instead, she said something that knocked the air out of my lungs. "I'll do it," she said, her voice unusually quiet and serious. "I'll be your surrogate." Ben and I just stared at her, speechless. "I'm serious," she continued, a small smile playing on her lips. "You are the most deserving people in the world. I see how much you want this. My body works. Let me do this for you. Let me help you have your family." Tears streamed down my face. It was the most selfless, most loving gesture I had ever witnessed. It felt like the clouds had finally parted. We talked for hours. She was insistent. She didn't want to be a traditional surrogate using her own egg. It would be our embryo, our biological child. She would just be the oven, as she cheerfully put it. We immediately went the official legal route. We hired separate lawyers. We drew up a comprehensive surrogacy agreement. It stipulated that we would cover all of her medical expenses, her living expenses for the duration of the pregnancy, and a generous compensation fee upon the birth of the child and the relinquishing of her parental rights. It was ironclad, or so we thought. Zoe was a model of cooperation. She passed all the medical and psychological screenings with flying colors. The psychologist noted that her desire to help her sister was deeply altruistic. The embryo transfer was a success on the first try. Zoe was pregnant with our baby. The joy I felt was indescribable. It was a pure, undiluted happiness I had thought I would never feel. I was finally going to be a mother. We treated Zoe like a queen. We found her a beautiful, fully furnished apartment near us so we could be close by. We paid for organic meal delivery services, prenatal yoga, acupuncture, anything she even hinted at wanting. We gave her a generous monthly stipend so she wouldn't have to worry about work. My job, I told her, was to be a healthy, happy home for our baby for the next 9 months. The first trimester was perfect. She was glowing. We went to every doctor's appointment together. I cried when I heard our baby's heartbeat for the first time. Zoe held my hand and cried with me. We were a team. The cracks started to appear so slowly, I barely noticed them. It began with small, manipulative comments, usually directed at our parents. "Clara's being a little intense about my diet," she'd say to my mom on the phone, knowing I could overhear. "It's well meant, but it's a lot of pressure." My mother, who had always been susceptible to Zoe's dramatics, would then call me. "Honey, you need to relax a little. Don't stress Zoe out. The baby can feel it." I wasn't being intense. I was just asking if she had taken her prenatal vitamins. But slowly, a narrative began to form. I was the anxious, controlling sister, and Zoe was the sweet, put-upon vessel. The financial demands started to escalate. The stipend was no longer enough. She needed a new car because her old one wasn't safe enough for the baby. Ben and I, wanting to avoid any conflict, agreed. We leased her a brand new SUV. Then she started complaining about the apartment. It was too noisy. The air wasn't fresh enough. She sent me links to luxury condos with pools and gyms. "The stress of living here isn't good for my blood pressure," she'd say, her hand resting on her growing belly. Again, we gave in. We moved her into a condo that was twice as expensive. Anything for the baby. Anything to keep the peace. She began to subtly drive a wedge between me and Ben. She'd call him privately to complain about me. "I hate to bother you with this, Ben, but Clara is just so emotional lately. Is she okay? I'm worried about her." She would position herself as his calm, rational ally against my hormonal behavior. It didn't work on Ben, who saw through her, but it was exhausting. We felt like we were constantly walking on eggshells, held hostage by her whims. But every time we would look at the ultrasound pictures taped to our fridge, we would tell ourselves it was worth it. It was temporary. In a few months, our baby would be here, and this would be a distant memory. We were such fools. We were funding the construction of our own prison. The day our daughter was born should have been the happiest day of my life. It was the day the twist came. The moment the mask of altruism was finally ripped away, revealing the monster underneath. The labor was long and difficult. I was in the delivery room the entire time, holding Zoe's hand, coaching her through every contraction, while Ben stood by, his face a mask of anxious excitement. I was the one who cut the umbilical cord. When the nurse placed that tiny, screaming, perfect little girl in my arms, my entire world shifted on its axis. The love I felt was so overwhelming, so fierce, it was almost painful. This was my daughter, my Lily. The first 24 hours were a blur of new parent bliss. We had a private room for Zoe, and Ben and I stayed with her, taking turns holding and feeding Lily. Zoe seemed tired, but happy. She smiled as she watched us with the baby. "You two are naturals," she said. The next morning, the hospital's legal administrator came in with the final paperwork. It was a standard procedure. A few signatures and the birth certificate would be issued with my and Ben's names, and Zoe would formally relinquish all parental rights as per our contract. The administrator handed the clipboard to Zoe. I was bouncing Lily in my arms, humming a lullaby, barely paying attention. Zoe picked up the pen, and then she put it down. "I can't," she said, her voice a small, tearful whisper. I stopped humming. Ben and I both turned to look at her. "What do you mean you can't?" Ben asked, his voice gentle. "I can't sign it," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. She looked at Lily, then at me, her face a perfect portrait of maternal anguish. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize I would feel this way. She's my baby. I carried her. I can't give her up. I just can't." The world stopped. The air left my lungs. The happy, warm hospital room suddenly felt like a cold, airless tomb. This had to be a joke, a sick, twisted joke. "Zoe, what are you talking about?" I said, my voice trembling. "We have a contract. This is our baby, our embryo." "A piece of paper doesn't change biology," she sobbed, her voice rising in hysterics. "She is a part of me. You can't just take her away from me. You're trying to take my baby." The nurses, hearing the commotion, rushed in. Zoe was now screaming, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Get her away from my baby! She's trying to steal my baby!"
Security was called. Ben and I were escorted out of the room, leaving our daughter in the arms of a screaming, manipulative stranger who was, in the eyes of the hospital staff, her mother. We were blindsided, devastated. Our lawyer was shocked. He said that in all his years, he had never seen a gestational surrogate do this. It was a legal nightmare. The contract was on our side, but the optics were a disaster. And then, the full scope of her plan became clear. She had been working on our parents for months. When Nay arrived at the hospital, they didn't rush to comfort me. They went straight to Zoe's room. My mother emerged an hour later, her face grim. "Clara, you have to be reasonable," she said, refusing to meet my eyes. "Your sister has been through a trauma. You can't expect her to just hand over a child. She's the mother." "I am the mother," I screamed, my voice raw. "She is my biological child." "It's not that simple," my father said, his voice full of disappointment, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "You need to give Zoe some space. We'll figure this out as a family." But Zoe had no intention of figuring it out. She checked out of the hospital the next day with Lily. She had a lawyer, a good one, who immediately filed for an emergency custody order. We were served with papers that afternoon. We were being sued for sole custody of our own daughter. And that is how we ended up in a courtroom 6 weeks later, having seen our daughter only a handful of times during supervised, excruciatingly painful 1-hour visits. Zoe's lawyer painted a masterful picture. She was the poor young woman who had wanted to help her barren sister. We were the rich older couple who had coerced her and were now trying to rip a baby from her loving arms. She had spent 9 months poisoning my family against me, and now she was poisoning the legal system. She was winning, and with every day that passed, my daughter was bonding with the wrong mother. We were losing everything. Our money was draining away in legal fees, our family was fractured, and worst of all, we were losing our daughter. The weeks following that first court hearing were the darkest of my life. The judge, swayed by the powerful image of Zoe as the birth mother, granted her temporary custody pending a full hearing in 3 months. We were allowed 2 supervised visits a week in a sterile room at a family services center with a court-appointed monitor watching our every move. Each visit was a fresh new hell. Lily would cry when they took her from Zoe's arms and cry again when they took her from mine. Zoe would watch me with a look of smug pity, offering unsolicited advice. "You're not holding her right, Clara. She likes to be bounced a little more," she would say, undermining my confidence, asserting her control. My parents were fully on her side. They had moved her into their house to help with the baby. They cooed over Lily, calling Zoe a natural. They treated me with a cold disappointment. "We're so disappointed in you," my mother said during one strained phone call. "Can't you see how much she loves that baby? Why are you doing this to your sister? Why are you being so selfish?" But gaslighting was complete. My pain was reframed as selfishness. My fight for my own child was an attack on my sister. I was completely isolated, with only Ben as my anchor in a storm of betrayal. Ben was my rock. He never wavered, but I could see the toll it was taking on him, the sleepless nights, the stress of the legal bills, the heartbreak of seeing his daughter in the arms of a liar. Our dream had become a waking nightmare.
Our lawyer told us our chances were 50-50. The contract was strong, but family court judges often prioritize the psychological parent. And every day Lily spent with Zoe, that bond grew stronger. We needed more than a contract. We needed a silver bullet. We needed to prove that this wasn't a spontaneous change of heart. We needed to prove this was a premeditated plan. The old Clara would have given up. The people pleaser, the one who hated conflict, would have crumbled under the weight of her own family's disapproval. But motherhood had changed me, even a motherhood that had been stolen from me. The fierce, protective love I felt for Lily had burned away all my old weaknesses. I was a mother bear, and someone had taken my cub. I would not stop. I would not rest. I would burn the whole world down to get her back. I started digging. I became an obsessive detective. My sister's life, my sole focus. I knew Zoe. I knew her vanity, her arrogance, her need for validation. If there was a plan, she would have needed to brag about it somewhere. I tried her social media, but she had blocked me. I tried her old laptops, but they were password protected. I was hitting a wall. The legal battle was draining our savings. The stress was starting to crack even Ben's steadfast resolve. Hope was starting to fade. And then I remembered the shoes. About a year before she got pregnant, Zoe had gone through a phase where she was trying to be a fashion influencer. She had started a blog. It was a cringy, self-indulgent mess that she had abandoned after a few months when she didn't become an overnight sensation. I had a vague memory of the name, something silly like Zoe's Soulful Style. I spent an entire night searching old emails and text messages until I found a link she had sent me. I clicked it. The blog was still there, dormant, a digital graveyard of bad outfits and vapid musings. The last post was over a year old. It was a dead end. Defeated, I was about to close the browser when I noticed something in the sidebar. A small icon for a photo sharing site, one I had never heard of. It wasn't Instagram or Pinterest. It was a more obscure, artsy platform. Curious, I clicked it. And there it was. Her profile. It was private, of course, but her profile picture was a shot of her feet in a pair of expensive designer heels. I recognized them. I had bought them for her birthday 2 years ago. The caption read,
A girl can't have too many shoes or too many secrets. It was the username that made my heart stop. It wasn't her name. It was the baby plan. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. This had to be it, but it was private. I couldn't get in. I tried to request access, but I knew she would deny it. Then I had an idea. Zoe was lazy, especially with technology. She probably used the same password for everything. I thought back. What was her go-to password? Her cat's name? Her birthday? No. It was something more arrogant. I remembered her typing it in once. It was flawless22. I went to the login screen. I typed in the username, the baby plan. I typed in the password, flawless22. I hit enter, and I was in. My blood turned to ice as I scrolled through the posts. It was a private photo diary, a step-by-step chronicle of her entire sociopathic plan. The first post was from the day after my doctor told me I couldn't have children. It was a screenshot of a surrogacy compensation calculator website. The caption read, "Time to solve my money problems and get the one thing I've always deserved, a baby. Let my dumb, rich sister pay for it all. #winning. #the baby plan."
Post after post laid it all out. Screenshots of her text conversations with me, with laughing emojis in the captions. Photos of the expensive gifts we bought her, captioned, "Phase 1, secure the funding, they are so gullible." There were even notes on how to manipulate our parents, with bullet points on my insecurities and my mother's weaknesses. The most damning post of all was from the day we signed the legal contract. It was a selfie of her, smiling, holding up the signed document. The caption read, "Just signed my soul away, LOL." This piece of paper is meaningless. The courts will always side with the mother. I Googled it. Checkmate. #legally blonde. Mommy wins. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to run to the bathroom. This was pure, calculated evil. She wasn't just sick, she was a monster. But as the nausea subsided, it was replaced by a cold, righteous fury. She had documented her own crime. She had handed me the silver bullet. I didn't just take screenshots. I used a program to download the entire account, every photo, every caption, every piece of metadata, preserving it as irrefutable digital evidence. I had her. The game was over, and I was about to be the one to declare checkmate. The final day in court felt different. The air was still heavy, but this time it was laced with a humming electric tension. I was no longer a victim begging for mercy. I was a warrior who had come to claim what was hers. Zoe sat across the aisle, looking confident. She had brought Lily to court again, a living, breathing prop for the judge's sympathy. She gave me a small, pitying smile, as if I were a bug she was about to squash. She had no idea I was the one holding the can of poison. Our lawyer called me to the stand for a final rebuttal testimony. He asked me about my relationship with my sister, about the events in the hospital. I answered calmly and truthfully. Then he asks the question we had rehearsed. "Miss Miller, do you have any evidence to suggest that your sister's decision in the hospital was not a spontaneous change of heart, but rather a premeditated plan?" "Yes, I do," I replied, my voice ringing with clarity. My sister is a meticulous planner. She documented her entire scheme on a private social media account. We have submitted a full, certified copy of that account to the court as Exhibit D. I looked at the judge, who was now looking down at a thick binder the clerk had just placed in front of him. Then I looked at Zoe. The color drained from her face. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated panic. She finally understood she was caught. Our lawyer put the
the first post on the large screen for the entire courtroom to see. The screenshot of the surrogacy compensation calculator. He read her caption aloud. "Time to solve my money problems and get the one thing I've always deserved. A baby. Let my dumb, rich sister pay for it all." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. My parents, sitting behind Zoe, stared at the screen, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. One by one, our lawyer projected the posts. The selfie with the contract, the notes on how to manipulate our parents, the gloating captions. It was a systematic, brutal demolition of her lies. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of our lawyer reading Zoe's own venomous words and the soft, whimpering sobs that started to come from my sister. Her lawyer was frantically objecting, but the judge waved him into silence, his eyes glued to the evidence, his expression growing darker with every slide. The final image was the selfie with the contract. "Checkmate," our lawyer read. "Mommy wins." He then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the only thing that has been won here is our sympathy for the victims of a cruel and sociopathic fraud. My clients, the true parents of this child." He rested his case.
The judge looked up from the binder, his gaze landing on Zoe with the force of a physical blow. She was openly weeping now. Not tears of maternal love, but the hot, humiliated tears of a narcissist who has been exposed. He didn't need to deliberate. He delivered his ruling from the bench, his voice filled with a cold fury I had not thought him capable of. In all my years on this bench, I have never seen a more flagrant, more malicious, or more cruel abuse of trust and family. This was not a matter of a mother's love. This was a calculated, criminal conspiracy to defraud a loving couple and steal a child. He slammed his gavel down. "I am terminating all parental rights of the surrogate effective immediately. Full and sole legal and physical custody is granted to the biological parents, Clara and Ben Miller. A permanent restraining order is hereby issued against Ms. Zoe Clark. She is not to come within 500 feet of the child or her parents." He looked at the bailiff. "Please return the child to her parents. Now." And just like that, it was over. A bailiff gently took a stunned and silent Lily from my sister's arms and walked her across the aisle. She placed my daughter in my arms. My Lily. I held her close, buried my face in her soft hair, and breathed in the scent of my own child for the first time, as her mother, truly her mother, with no one to take her away. I looked up at Ben, and we both sobbed. Tears of relief and joy washing away a year of pain. Across the room, my parents were staring at Zoe, who was being led away by her lawyer, their faces finally filled with the horror and shame they should have felt months ago. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered with a thunderclap. The weeks after the verdict were a time of quiet healing and rebuilding. Bringing Lily home was like the sun coming out after a year-long winter. Our house was finally filled with the sounds it was always meant to have. The gurgles, cries, and laughter of our beautiful daughter. Every diaper change felt like a victory. Every midnight feeding was a gift. We were a family. My parents were utterly shattered. They came to our house a few days after the hearing, their faces aged by shame. They apologized over and over, their tears genuine this time. We were so blind. My father said, his voice thick with regret. "She twisted everything. We are so sorry, Clara. We failed you." It was not an easy or immediate forgiveness. They had betrayed me in a profound way, choosing the word of a manipulator over their own daughter. But for Lily's sake, and for the sake of what was left of our family, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding that trust. Zoe disappeared. The restraining order was in place, and she faced potential criminal fraud charges. She left town, leaving a trail of debt and broken relationships behind her. I have not seen or heard from her since. I don't feel anger towards her anymore, just a vast, empty pity for a person with such a hollow soul. She will never know the true, selfless love of being a parent, the very thing she tried to steal from me. Our life now is beautiful in its normality. Lily is 3 years old, a whirlwind of joy and curiosity. Ben's is the most incredible father. Our home is a sanctuary of love and laughter. The scars of what we went through are still there, a quiet reminder of how fiercely we had to fight for the family we have. But they are just scars, not open wounds. I learned that motherhood isn't just about biology or birth, it's about the fight. It's about the ferocious, unconditional, unending love that makes you willing to burn down the world for your child. I am Lily's mother, not because of an embryo, but because I refuse to let her go. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours against people who should have been on your side? Share your story of perseverance in the comments below. Your strength is an inspiration. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding justice in the face of betrayal. Remember, sometimes the darkest nights are followed by the most beautiful dawns. Hold on. Your dawn is coming.